to come. All right. Now, I want to tell you why this is a real special thing. It's an honor that we have Bruce Conley here. A lot of places are doing church security. We've got experts that know churches. We've got experts that know law enforcement. We've got an expert here. You know what an expert is. An expert is somebody that came from another town to talk to you. We've got an expert here. So when I'm in my town, Perryville, I'm not an expert. If I go to someplace else, I'm an expert. Okay. But we've got a unique combination. We've got a gentleman that knows law enforcement. He's a street cop. He's a road cop. He's been a chief of police. He's done corporate security. I don't have time to tell you all the stuff he's done, but he knows pastoring, worship leading, director of missions, church planting. He knows both sides of this equation, so I'm so grateful to have him here leading us. Without further ado, Bruce Conley.
Hey, good morning, lady and gentlemen. So how many of you, if you had known you could have done this from home in your pajamas, you would not be here this morning? Just curious. Welcome to our attempt to cram probably 16 hours of information into 2 hours and a half with a break in between. One of the things that a lot of our churches is having to address, much to our dismay, is how do you make things more secure, especially in light of the increase of senseless attacks, live shooter situations in our nation that's not only prevalent on churches but schools and a lot of other soft targets. And it's just so hard to know what are the things that you put into a teaching module like this and what are the things that you know you can't get to but somebody might need, and then how do you catch up with that? Let me just tell you first of all that I am the current director of missions with the Blue Ridge Baptist Association. We serve 43 churches in Frederick and Washington County, Maryland primarily, but we also have churches in West Virginia and in Pennsylvania. So I'm a pretty busy guy. I'm a road warrior. I burn more tires up on my car than I care to imagine. I even drove through 7 counties to get to be with you this morning. So, and I couldn't believe it when my alarm clock went off, but that's okay. In a former life, I was a police officer in Prince George's County, Maryland. I'm a 1982 graduate of the Prince George's County Police Academy. Within a very short time, I advanced to become a chief of police in a small-town police department on the Maryland-D.C. line. I also served as a deputy chief and patrol commander for the Glen Arden Police Department in the 80s, and thoroughly enjoyed my law enforcement service. But there came a point where after you've been chief and a deputy chief and you're getting tired of rolling around bars with people every weekend and getting things thrown at you and on you, it's a young man's career. So feeling called more and more to the ministry, I pursued that and left law enforcement. I've always stayed active, however. Some of you noticed my winter coat down here that says police chaplain on it. I still serve as an active duty police chaplain in Prince George's County, Maryland. Even though I live in West Virginia now, I train a lot of the new chaplains. I'm also a chaplain with the Berkeley County Sheriff's Office in West Virginia where I live, and I also volunteer now as a reserve deputy sheriff with Berkeley County. They say once you get blue in your veins, that you can't lose it. So that's where I am. I love the history that God has taken me through, and hopefully with some of that history and knowledge, we'll be able to give you some ideas today on how you can protect your church should an active shooter occur, but also in general, how to develop policies and teams that across different situations will know how to address them when to get law enforcement involved, and that sort of thing. So let's go ahead and roll here. One of the areas of focus that we're going to talk about is, do you really need a plan? Especially, and I hear this all the time from smaller churches. You know, there's only 45 people in our worship center on Sundays. Do we really need a security plan? The answer is, if you want to protect your people, yes. Yes, you do. Doesn't matter the size of the church. What's the old adage? If we fail to plan, then you plan to fail. So, yes, you need a plan. We'll look this morning at some case studies in over a decade of shooters, and statistics from the FBI showed that the increase of churches being targets has started around 1999, although there were a couple of incidents before that. From 1999 to present, we've had a steady increase in church episodes. We're going to look a little bit at the mentality of a shooter, because if you're going to put a viable plan in place, you must think like the bad guy, okay? And there's a lot of different motivations from case examples that we can look at that will show you what type of person you may or may not be dealing with as they come into your church. We'll look at a shooter fact sheet, which gives us some of those statistics. And hopefully you'll be able to then develop a robust security response plan no matter what you're facing. And then at the end of this slide presentation, we'll do a Q&A session, and we will break for coffee and then break into our smaller groups for different topics. So, here we go. Does a congregation need a plan? Yes. When people come to your church, they have an expectation of safety. We live in a very litigious society, meaning people will sue you at the drop of a hat. And if people come to your church regularly with an expectation of safety and you have no plan to keep them safe, then you are liable. So, the other thing I want you to realize as we look at this is that the church is a soft target. You're going to hear that phrase a lot today. What is a soft target? A soft target is anywhere where a gunman can go where he knows pretty much he's going to have the path of least resistance. In other words, you don't go into a cop bar and rob the guy at the bar, because you're going to get about 62 guns pointed at you, okay? But in a church, what are the chances that somebody else is going to be armed, much less prepared to repel your attack? So churches, schools, preschools, kindergartens, they are considered soft targets. We know for a fact that shootings are on the increase in the United States. While they are still very rare, they do happen, and they are increasing as time goes by. The plan that you put in place should reduce the potential loss of life. And we're going to look at some very specific examples, not the least of which is a very recent shooting in Texas, as to how they decreased the loss of life by having a plan and people and, yes, weapons in place. It's important that you put your plan in place before an incident happens. You are preparing for what you hope never happens. But if you wait until you have an incident and then react, once again, courts could find you liable for not preparing in advance. So, what you're basically planning for is something that you are hoping you will never need, okay? So, let's talk about case studies here for just a minute. You and I can learn from case studies. We can gain perspective from case studies. And hopefully the facts that we draw from those case studies will not only raise our awareness of what could happen, but all the facets that were used or experienced in previous attacks on like-minded churches. Things like location, the time of the event, the attacker and his potential motives, even though in some cases you don't always figure out a motive. You can't explain, in many cases, the unexplainable, okay? What about victims and outcomes? And, let's face it, every church is responsible, not only up until the incident, but after the incident, there's a lot of things that need to be addressed. For instance, who's going to be the press person? Because the local media is going to come down on your church and be asking a million people a million questions if your congregation hasn't already tweeted it out to 4,000 people. So we'll be talking about all those kinds of things. Okay, let's look at the very first case study. September 15th, 1999, which by FBI standards is sort of the catalyst for an onslaught that kept increasing in churches in the United States. In this shooting in Texas, over 150 teenagers were in the church singing hymns at the time of the event. The suspect entered the worship center and shot 14 people in a very quick amount of time. He ended up killing 7 and injuring another 7, and then shot and killed himself. Okay? Next case study, and I'm going to breeze through these quickly. March 12, 2005, there was a church in Wisconsin. The suspect opened fire on the congregation, killing 7 and wounding 4 before taking his own life. Starting to see a pattern here? These guys are on a suicide mission so far. He was described, and this is unlike the recent situation we'll look at in a minute in Texas. He was described by people who knew him as a normal guy, no red flags, and no warning signs. People knew him to be a regular attender, and they thought he was just one of the group. Okay? December 9th, 2007, a church in Colorado. The suspect was asked to leave a youth center, and he complied and left, but he returned just under an hour later, opening fire, killing 2, and injuring 2. And he fled the scene, excuse me, and 35 minutes later, he went to another church and killed 2 more people. And at that second location, he was shot and killed by security at that church. Amazing. That suspect had over 1,000 rounds of ammunition with him. Now, can you imagine how many more people would have died if security at the second location hadn't taken that suspect out? 1,000 rounds. March 8th, 2009, there's a church in Illinois where the suspect walks into the church and his focus is on the pastor at the pulpit. And he shoots the pastor dead at point-blank range. Several church members then confront the shooter with aggression and overpower him before he can get off more rounds. In that shooting, the pastor was the intended target. And anybody else that he could take out, which the church members stopped it, were just icing on the cake for that shooter. He wanted that pastor. Church members had, no other option than to act. Just jump on this guy en masse and hope that somebody didn't get shot in the process. August 5th, 2012, there was a temple in Wisconsin where a male suspect fatally shot 6 people, wounded 4 others in a mass shooting. The suspect committed suicide by shooting himself in the head, listen, after he was shot in the stomach by responding police. Now, whether or not it was his intention all along to kill himself, and once he was shot, he figured, okay, the game's over, we'll never know. March 31st, 2013, a church in Ohio. A suspect kills his father at the church. Okay, now we got a different dynamic we're looking at. This is a domestic dispute. And the target that the shooter has is a family member inside the church building. He kills his father, shouts something about Allah and God, and he leaves the scene and is later arrested off-site by police officers. Okay, so let's advance to a video now that we have that shows the most recent church shooting. You've seen this. This is one of the news outlets that highlighted the story and some other history of church shootings. And we'll talk a little bit once the video is done about this particular response to the threat. Let's roll the video.
He said, drop it. And then he said, drop it. And then all he did was pull out a gun and started shooting. And then they all surrounded him with guns, and then they shot him, and I heard like 3 shots.
It is a scene no child should ever bear witness. Tragedy shattering a peaceful Sunday morning service.
So like the gunman was like just sitting there for a good minute or two, and he was just standing there, and the gunman stood up and turned around to him. So probably like 3 feet away from my papa.
Chris Wallace describing the horror when a gunman shot his grandfather, Tony Wallace, inside this church near Fort Worth, Texas. Live stream video capturing every moment.
It's kind of like heartbreaking, but sometimes you gotta be strong about it and just keep on going.
His papa, one of 2 parishioners, killed this weekend. And tonight, new details on the shooter and the man who brought him down, now held as a hero for preventing a much bigger tragedy inside the West Freeway Church of Christ.
The citizens who were inside that church undoubtedly saved 242 other parishioners.
This shooting joining a growing list of attacks involving places of worship from Charleston to Pittsburgh, and the problem appears to be growing. Sunday's shooting was the 2nd attack on a religious gathering in less than 24 hours. In a Jewish community just outside New York City, a man stabbed 5 people as they celebrated Hanukkah. Back in Texas, authorities identifying 43-year-old Keith Thomas Kananen as the shooter. They say he has had run-ins with law enforcement in the past, but they have not figured out a motive for this attack.
Today, evil walked boldly among us. But let me remind you, good people raised up and stopped it before it got worse.
Video shows that it was 10:50 Sunday morning when the shooter entered the church.
I mean, the shooter was sitting next to my mother. She knew from growing up at the church that she didn't recognize this gentleman.
Over 200 parishioners were in attendance, including 71-year-old Jack Wilson, a reserve deputy sheriff.
We noticed that his right hand was visible, but his left hand never was visible. So I'm assuming at this point that the shotgun was in his pocket with all the way up under his armpit, and he's holding it in place with his left hand.
In the video, you see the gunman there wearing a dark hoodie sitting in the back pew. He then gets up, walks to the back, and appears to say something to a deacon, and then pulls out a long gun, aims, and begins to shoot. The attack lasting just 6 seconds.
That's a long 6 seconds. And a lot of things go down in 6 seconds.
Wilson, who is in charge of church security, pulls out his own gun, fires a single shot, and kills the gunman before he could harm anyone else.
Active threat, 1900 South Las Vegas Trail.
Cries amidst the chaos erupting. At least 5 other parishioners pulled out handguns and carefully approached the gunman. Toward the back of the church, one man kicks away the suspect's gun and picks it up. All of it happening as parishioners duck in the pews and children run for safety.
We're going to need help with patient care.
It was a sad thing that he had to come into the congregation and hurt people, and it's a sad thing that we had to hurt him.
Authorities and parishioners now praising Wilson's split-second decision to intervene.
I don't feel like I'm a hero. I was doing what I needed to do to protect the people of the congregation. And in the same scenario, I would do it again.
Wilson, who was a former law enforcement officer, also trained the church's volunteer security team. He says it is not just about having the gun, but knowing how to use it.
My philosophy is if you're going to wear a firearm for self-protection of yourself and others, you need to be proficient. And if you produce it, what I tell the students in my classes, you have to be willing to use it if you produce it, if it doesn't stop the threat. And that's what I live by, that's what I teach. Otherwise, there's no sense in wearing it.
The heroism by Wilson and fellow churchgoers highlighting the passage of a recent law allowing licensed Texans to carry weapons into churches and other places of worship.
The obvious pro of having armed individuals in the church is that they were able to immediately return fire and stop the suspect from killing other people. The downside is you're really talking about shooting in a combat environment. And the problem with that is even those of us who have been trained to do that will make mistakes. So the big concern is crossfire and shooting innocent people. You have to accept the reality that if those people aren't highly trained and know how to function in a combat crisis situation, you can have fatalities that were not intended.
We have 6 ambulances en route.
That new law passed in the aftermath of the deadliest shooting in Texas history, also at a church. In 2017, the massacre at First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs killed 26 people. A gunman opened fire during the Sunday morning service. My colleague Matt Gutman spoke with a survivor.
When you're like this and you're covering your head, what are you thinking?
I shouldn't have gone to church that day. He told me not to go. Let's not go. Let's just wait till next week. And I'm never going to see my grandchildren again. And I'm going to die.
It wasn't until local resident Steve Wilford, who was armed and outside the church, opened fire that the gunman began to retreat.
As he exited the church, a local resident grabbed his rifle and engaged that suspect.
I'm no hero. I am not. I just wish I could have gotten there faster.
While an autopsy confirmed that Wilford did shoot the gunman, the attacker ultimately killed himself.
2 gunshot wounds were from the armed citizen. One of those was in the leg and the other one was in the torso.
At the time, Wilford was a concerned neighbor, but he has since become a member of the First Baptist Church he fought to protect. And today, he tells ABC he's headed to White Settlement, Texas, as a representative of that church.
With my soul.
In solidarity with the residents grieving the violence and tragedy that tried to bring their community to a halt. Tonight, behind closed doors, this church finishing the service that was tragically cut short on Sunday, remembering those lives they lost and honoring the brave who saved so many. For Nightline, I'm Marcus Moore in White Settlement, Texas.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live.
How was this shooting different? Well, the person was not known to the congregation, or if he was not known really well. From the moment he walked in the church building, security personnel noticed him acting strange, looking strange. He had a wig. He had a fake beard. He was, back and forth and then finally down towards the front and sitting down. He was, in the security man's words, wouldn't move his left arm. Well, if you're hiding a weapon under your left side, that's usually what people do. Even if you had a holster on, in order for people not to see the bulge, you're going to keep that arm tight up against your side. So security had their eyes on this guy from the moment he walked in. How long did it take to kill 2 people? 6 seconds. 6 seconds. Even though they were trained on him, they knew this could be a potential problem, it took them 6 seconds to respond, and 2 men lost their lives. Now, when they did respond, the head of security was ready. Obviously, this man is like me. He's practiced his whole life with being proficient with a firearm. When I was a policeman, I was certified as an NRA instructor. I was certified by the Maryland Police Training Commission as a firearms instructor, classroom instructor. Some years ago, I had a cornea transplant, which I just recently had redone. I was right eye dominant, right hand dominant until that time. I still have blurred vision in my right eye, but I still have to qualify for my Maryland handgun permit every 2 years. I still shoot expert or distinguished expert every single time. That's what practice gets you. And yes, I agree, it's very hard to develop a plan in Maryland because getting permits in Maryland is like pulling eye teeth. And it's a game with the state police that sometimes you just can't win, okay? However, if you're going to authorize people in your church to carry weapons as a defense to this kind of an incident, you need to make sure that they are well trained, that they qualify often, because once again, you could open your church up to lots of liability. This guy's been teaching handgun skills probably for 40 plus years, and when he had to take action, he realized he couldn't shoot the suspect center mass. I've seen another interview. Because people were cowering in the pews between him and the suspect, and he didn't want to hit any of them, so he took the headshot, and all it took was one bullet, and he was down. Now, to think that you and I would have to do that in one of our churches is mind-boggling. But this is what it takes if you're going to truly be prepared to keep your people safe in your church environment. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Faith-based shooters by state. You can look at the map. From 1999 to 2013 was the statistics I was able to pull up. There were 26 incidents inside the United States. And those 26 incidents resulted in 64 deaths in churches. That's 64 too many. Now, this doesn't even include, statistically from the FBI, other types of incidents like robberies, stabbings, assaults. It's strictly the guy comes in with a gun intending to do harm. 64 deaths and 26 incidents. If we had to add all those other violent acts and incidents in churches, that number would climb into the hundreds, honestly. Okay? What is an active shooter? The definition is that it's an armed person whose action is, or let me rephrase the way it's printed on the slide, whose action is potentially or is actually immediately causing death or great bodily injury to others. So just because he hadn't squeezed off a shot yet, I consider that to be an active shooter situation. If he's armed, he's not supposed to be armed. He's looking for victims, okay? Let's look at the mentality of a shooter real quickly here from these case studies. Usually the shooter will continue his rampage until he's stopped. His primary motive is revenge or hatred. There are other motives. There's domestic, there's marital issues, there's child custody issues, there's a dispute within the congregation. That individual or someone he knows and loves was denied services. He's disappointed in leadership's decisions or direction in the church. You can almost always count that there's some degree of physical or mental illness involved with the shooter or someone he knows. There's financial trouble, or in many cases, this person is just mad at the world, and he wants to get back at the world. Or it really simply could be anything. Whatever he dreams up in his head, if that's his reasoning, he's going to go for it. Many people will ask, are there pre-indicators? There are in many cases, but not across the board. Remember the one church that said, this was a regular guy. He comes to our church all the time. There were no red flags. He didn't act weird. Never brought a gun before that we knew of, you know. In a basic analysis of these things, key findings are that unless the person communicates intent directly to someone else, you're never going to know. Now, sometimes they do. Sometimes they share with a very trusted friend or family member what they're planning, and then hopefully law enforcement gets involved before it actually happens. We've seen cases of that even in the D.C. area. Police are serving a search warrant on a guy's house because he threatened to blow up whatever. Here's another indicator. The larger your church, the more difficult looking for pre-indication is. It's easier to monitor or notice the behavior of 1 in 60 than it is 1 in 450. Would you agree with that? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's look at some facts from some of these shooting incidents. By age, only 4% of shooters in churches are under 18. So your youth are pretty safe, okay? Usually. 52% are between 19 and 50 years old. And 44% are older than 51. That means 96% of church shooters are 19 and above. Now let's look at gender. Obviously, males are much higher on the list than females, to the tune of almost 90%. What's the day of choice? Well, obviously, churches have their main stuff on Sundays, right? So there you go. Sunday is the day. Little higher on Wednesday night. What do you do on Wednesday night? Prayer meeting, Bible study, et cetera, et cetera. It's important to note that the idea might brew in this person's mind for weeks or months before he takes action. And usually his pre-implementation, this is according to the FBI, starts about 2 days before the attack. That's when he goes and gets weapons he doesn't yet have, gets ammunition, figures out how he's going to hide it, gets the right holster, you know. And obviously, you're at much higher risk on Sundays. That's when your team, your security team, needs to be on its A game, okay? Period of choice on Sunday. When do these things happen on Sundays? Before the service, during the service, after the service. These people are looking for glory, and the best way to do that is when you're in a room of unprotected sheep and there's a crowd. Used to be a phrase called spray and pray if you had a machine gun, right? Military people, you remember that. Spray and pray. Well, if he's going to do that and get the most of what he's looking to get, that's what he's going to do. He's going to wait till everybody's in the sanctuary, okay? And it's usually, according to statistics, right after the service starts or begins, okay? Time of day, obviously it can happen any time of day, but when you look at your services on Sundays and your meeting times, those are key factors. It's not hard to figure out. Shooter outcomes. This is very interesting to me. 44% of shooters in churches commit suicide, either on site or sometime after, when they're being pursued by law enforcement. 44%. They not only intend to kill you and everybody with you, they're going to kill themselves when it's all done. Okay? Only 4% are killed by responding police. Only 4%. Why? What's the response time in your neighborhood if police are coming to your church? Now, I was chief of police in a small town on the Maryland-D.C. line that was 1 square mile. My guys used to get so bored patrolling that 1 square mile town. They would sneak out and go on calls with the neighboring jurisdictions just to get something going. Our response time in Cottage City, Maryland, was 4 minutes. And that's the best you're going to get in Prince George's County, Maryland. If you have a small municipal department, you'll probably see a cop once you call 911 in about 4 to 5 minutes, because they're right in the neighborhood. They're coming fast. Other areas, if you're down in Cheltenham, it's going to be a while, and a lot of damage can be done in 10, 15, 17 minutes. That's why only 4% are killed by responding police. 20% stopped by people present in the church. My goal, gentlemen, ladies, is to increase that. You know, they used to teach us in the police academy, if you get shot, keep fighting. Just because you've been hit doesn't mean you are down and you can no longer take action. It was the will of trying to still conquer the attacker and subdue him to the point where he was not going to attack anybody else. So if you took one in the chest or in the leg or in the shoulder, they told you, keep firing back, keep fighting. And unfortunately, most churches, when something like this happens, what do most of the people do? They cower, they run, they hide under pews and chairs. Nobody, and I know this is hard, but we're men, nobody goes after the attacker. Well, if nobody goes after him, how are you going to stop the onslaught? Now, do people get shot going after the attacker? Yes, they do. Do people get killed? Yes, it does happen. But I'd much rather do that and save 100 of my church family than to cower underneath a pew. Okay? We've got to increase that 20%. 32% are arrested after fleeing the scene. Okay, we've got to move on. Trying to cram a lot into a little time here. Considerations for a robust security and response plan. Remember, all churches are different. They're different in size, in layout, in entrances and exits. They're different in the number of people that are there on a given Sunday. And no standardized plan that you can find on the internet is going to fit your church exceedingly well. You need to do an in-house analysis. I personally recommend that you connect with your local police or sheriff's office. If they have a liaison within the office that helps churches with things like this, get that person in there. It's free of charge. They can walk the building with you. They can make recommendations on what to do about securing certain doors after the church is up and running. I'm doing a security consulting right now for a church in Winchester, Virginia. It's pastored by one of my old pastors now. And they have a problem that the church is really destitute in funding, so they can only spend money on a few things. And they have no way of securing the multiple doors to the church after worship is in session. Now, you always want to have one set of doors open, and hopefully with the security person monitoring those doors as people come in and out. They've got 3 sets of doors that come to the building with the sanctuary in it, and they've got, ready for this, 8 sets of doors into the gymnasium in the next building over, which connects by 2 hallways to the worship center. Problem. And they don't, because they can't secure the doors, because they don't have the money to pay for push bar openers that the fire department requires. And I told them, I understand you don't have the money, but you got to find a way to fund this and get it done right away if you want to secure your worship center on Sundays. Your plan should include an initial assessment, a plan for you to promote awareness among your congregation. Now let's talk about that for just a second. You don't want to scare your people to death, okay? And you have the propensity to do that, especially with children. Be careful. I was just watching on the news yesterday where the live shooter drills that they're having in some school systems are causing kids to have nightmares and not want to go to school because they're scared that bad man is eventually coming to my school and I need to be ready. So you got to be really careful about awareness, and you have to be careful with naysayers that say, oh, we don't need a security plan. You know, yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. You'll see the words on the slides here because I borrowed portions of this presentation from Church Mutual, talking about key staff. Well, that's great if you got a church of 500, but how many of you really have additional staff other than the pastor and your secretary? So let's talk about key leaders, okay? Your key leaders need to be trained. They need to be ready. Those are the people that your people will follow when there is an incident, okay? You need to have a recommended course of action. You need to have a post-incident course of action. One of the things you need to plan for is, who's calling 911? It's okay if people with cell phones in your congregation make multiple calls to 911. You don't encourage that, but 911 is usually prepared for multiple calls on an incident. But there should be somebody designated, otherwise everybody's always thinking that somebody else took care of that, okay? You need to consider in your planning a post-incident counseling process. Anybody that goes through something like this, they're a little devastated, and they might benefit from some good Christian counseling in the aftermath. And like I spoke about before, media protocol. What do you do when the news reporters are all over and they want to interview your people? Don't let everybody speak for the church, okay? Pick one or two people that are going to be the media folks. Consideration for armed security in your plan. Well, once again, you know, we could talk about this all morning long, but I'm going to try to synopsize it in about 3 minutes. Maryland is very difficult to get handgun permits. Even if someone gets a handgun permit for the first time in their lives, I'm not sure I would recommend them being the point person to take action. You know what? You have to be really proficient. And you have to practice a lot. I would sooner take a police officer or an ex-police officer or military in your church and ask them to be the point person once they've had the proper training, okay? I was speaking with one of my pastors that's in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, just this past week, and he said they're working on their protocol for security again. They're doing a revision on it. And he said, you know, the problem in West Virginia is it's open carry. Everybody in my congregation could walk in with a Desert Eagle hanging off their side, and there's not anything anybody could do about that. He's exercising his Second Amendment rights. Okay, understand that. But do you really want a congregation full of armed people responding to a single person? No. Can you imagine the crossfire that would happen in that situation, the number of people, you know, that would be down? You may or may not have hit the suspect, but you got, you know, the Sunday school teachers in the front row are gone now. You just have to be so careful about this. And he's trying to develop a plan that basically tells his congregation, no, I can't stop you from coming into the church on Sunday armed. But unless you're a designated part of the security team and the response to an incident, we're going to ask that you keep that thing holstered. That's all I'm going to say about that. Yes, go ahead.
Can you describe exactly what a point person is?
Well, when you develop your team, you're going to have a leader of that team. Okay, so your security team leader is a point person. But when you actually come down to what action are we taking in the event of a shooting, there's a point person who is one of the armed people that will then develop that strategy and plan, and then hopefully, put it into your paperwork so that everybody on the security team knows if something goes down, that's the person that's going to respond to that. That's a point person, okay? We'll take more questions here at the end. How am I doing on time, John?
You're doing tremendous. 15 minutes.
About 15 more? Okay, good. Boy, we got a lot to cover in 15 minutes. Rock and roll. Your initial assessment should include size and layout of the facility, size of the congregation, internal and external risk factors, lockdown capability, number of exits, location of children's ministry, because, hey, security team, that should be a real priority for you if something happens in the building, okay? Armed or unarmed security. I work for two security firms in Maryland. One's in Annapolis, one is in Landover, Maryland, that hire off-duty and retired police officers to do assignments just like this. I also know that, for instance, Redland Baptist in the Montgomery Association hires an off-duty Montgomery County police officer every single Sunday. And he's out front with his cruiser, and he's in the lobby of the church, and he's in full uniform. So depending on how you can do that, a lot of churches don't have a lot of money to pay somebody to do that. But if you don't have any other resources within the church, that is an option for you. Pre-established response protocols is always a good idea, especially for active shooter. Training for congregation, staff, and security. Communication methods. What does your team use? Do you use FRS radios on your hips? Do you use your cell phones? On my cell phone, I have a program. How many of you used to have Nextel phones where you could do the push to talk? Okay? So there's programs out there you can download onto your cell phone right now, and it acts just like a push to talk. So do you need to buy walkie-talkies? Not necessarily, as long as you have good cell phone coverage in your church and on the grounds. You just install that program, and you guys can talk to each other just like you would a Nextel. What are the communication methods? What's the response time? Next time you have to call a police officer to come to your church, whether it's a routine response or an emergency response, or even an ambulance emergency response. Somebody is down in the aisle or whatever. Take time to see how long it takes them to get to you. It'll give you kind of a rule of thumb as to if you have an incident, how long is it going to take them to get there? How long do you have to hold down the fort until law enforcement arrives? Oh, and by the way, I'll throw this in on a side note. Once law enforcement is on the scene, anybody in your church that is armed is holstered. If you have that weapon out when that officer walks in, you're going to be the next shooting victim. When I was a young policeman, I don't even think they teach this anymore. They used to tell us, if you get involved in something off duty and a uniformed officer arrives on the scene, here's the sign. I'm an off-duty police officer. It shows both hands, but it also tells him, why is this guy, oh, okay, he's an off-duty. I don't even think they do that anymore. They might. But you need to determine in your protocol, do our people wear shirts that say security on them? Do they have a pull-out badge that says security that they can pull out of their pocket and put around their neck so they can be identified? And all those things are great, but don't you dare have a weapon in your hand. Even if you're holding it on the suspect, once the officer walks in and then has potential control over the situation, you lay that weapon down. It's the officer's charge at that point, not yours. I don't want to see anybody in our churches get shot, just because they were taking action and didn't know to lay it down when the officer arrived. You also need to think about security equipment, cameras, recording, those sort of things. In this Texas case, they live streamed the church shooting. They didn't know. That's what they did every Sunday. And now it's a great training tool for us. But when I was executive pastor at Crest Hill Baptist Church in Bowie, Maryland, we had a break-in at the church. We had a series of incidents at the church. We actually had catalytic converters that were being stolen off parishioners' cars while we were in worship. They bring in a creeper and a battery-powered power saw and slide under the 4x4s, and in 2 minutes, they got your catalytic converter, and they're gone. That's when we added foot patrol in the parking lots. That's all the kind of stuff that your security teams needs to think about. So we had the problems with people attempting to break into the church, breaking into the church. Well, we got a security camera system that cost us all of $300. And we did an 8-camera shoot, 4 cameras inside the church, 4 cameras outside the church. And one night, church got broken into. The alarm was set to activate audibly 2 minutes after the sensor was interrupted. So they were in the building when the audible alarm went off, 2 juveniles. They ran back out the way they came in once the audible was off, and I got great pictures of both of their faces. And within a week, we knew who they were. We were charging them criminally. And I hate to say it, one of the 2 was a neighborhood pastor's son. Can't make this stuff up, can you? Okay, promoting awareness amongst the congregation is huge, but please be careful not to scare people too much. You can do that through newsletters, although don't bet that everybody reads your newsletter. You know that. Smaller congregations, you can have a congregation meeting. Larger congregations, you might want to consider a different way of promoting awareness, setting forth policy. The next slide, shows an active shooter booklet that they put together for their church and hands out. Just print your church's policy and protocol and make sure it's available so that the majority of people who come to your church know, hey, these people got their act together. I think I'm safe on Sunday mornings. And I know what to do if something goes down. Now, before any incident, urge your congregation to just maintain general awareness of your security plan, your security people. Encourage them to report unusual situations to leaders, okay? What's the old adage in D.C. on the metro? If you see something, say something. There you go. During an active shooter incident, make sure your people know what the course of action will be. Course of action, of course, being get out if it's safe to do so. Call for help. If you're unable to get out, then you hide horizontally, just like we've seen so many cases where people get under the pews. Yeah, there's usually enough wood or pressed wood in those pews that they'll at least slow down a bullet, might stop it or divert it. If you're in a classroom situation with kids or youth, lock the door if you can, shelter in place. But when it comes down to it, if you're in face-to-face contact with a shooter, go for the weapon. Go for the weapon. How many of your security personnel know the difference between a revolver and an automatic? To the point where if the automatic is out of ammo, do you know the sound of him dropping the first clip and getting ready to slip the second one in? Because if you do, that's your moment. Because he's out of ammunition at that point. Now, he can slip that new one in and get it ready to go in a couple of seconds. So time is of the essence. But those are the sort of things you need to put into place with your security folks. I'm going to skip to prepare key staff or lay leaders, we're calling them for this training. That means your leadership in your church, your Sunday school director, your usher, key point person, your chairman of deacons, people that greet at the front door of the church, ushers that will be in the service taking up communion or serving communion or taking up offering. All these people need to be in the loop. Everybody knows what the policy and the strategy is. Youth ministry staff, volunteers who play critical roles, anybody that needs to be in the loop, because once again, those are the people that the average church member are going to follow in the event of something going down pretty quickly. Because I'm running out of time, I'm going to shift here to, what if you are outdoors? Let's face it, children's church, they've done their Bible study and they want to go out and play in the playground. If you're outdoors, seek shelter in any safe building that's nearby. If that's not practical, hide behind a building. Run with the group towards an opposite or safe direction. When I was a dad of 4 kids, we always had a fire plan at my house. And I would tell my kids, you need to go to Mr. Shorter's next door if anything happens, and I will meet you over there. You need to do the same thing when it comes to active shooters. Where are people going to run to that's safe or safer? If you're being pursued, run between objects, okay? After arriving at a safer location, then, when you're sure the threat is not following you, call 911 if you have a cell phone in your pocket. A shooter enters your location. The applicable leaders should consider the shooter's distance from the congregation, from children, from staff, and should try to modify the plan on his feet accordingly. For instance, if the active shooter comes into your church and he's headed straight for the children's area, he's not a threat to the folks in the sanctuary, right? So that would be the point where you tell the sanctuary folks, we're out of here, and here's the door. Always call 911 as quickly as you can. Let's skip to, I'm sorry, I'm having to skip some of this stuff. Basics of a security team. This is important. This is going to be a very complicated subject to process. There is no easy path. And because state laws vary, you're going to have to make sure that whatever you put into place is in line with state law, okay? So, is there an armed security presence in the church? Do you let the whole congregation know? Or do you just let leaders and key officials, leaders, know who's armed? At Crest Hill, when I developed their security team years ago, I got together a lot of off-duty police officers, federal agents, and things like that, and I said, look, guys, here's the thing. I've done what you have done work-wise. When I go to church on Sundays, the last thing I want to do is strap the iron on. I get it, you know. I'd like to have one day where I just feel like a normal person with my family at church. But here's the thing. We're asking you, please, come to church armed. We know you're armed, but the whole congregation doesn't, okay? But if something goes down in the sanctuary and you're sitting there with your wife and kids, you're the only thing that's between us and a whole bunch of deaths. Please. And most of those people, we had the guy who was the deputy director of intelligence for the FBI field office in D.C. for counterterrorism. And he said, you know what, I hate bringing my weapon to church, but I'll do it. So the other options, you know, are security guards that are certified to do what they do. Right now in my pocket, I have a carry permit in Maryland. Even though I'm a retired policeman, they make me go through the hoops for that every 2 years. And I have a security guard license because I work for these security companies in Baltimore and in PG County pretty regularly. Lastly, on that page, if you have an attorney in your church, put that person on the planning team for your policies and your implementation. Legally, they will help you so much in trying to protect yourself from the onslaught of lawsuits. Okay, we're going to skip the United States laws. By the way, on the chart, it says that Maryland is one of the most regulated and difficult places to get a handgun permit. And where I live in West Virginia, it's the most loose. I love going to Bob Evans and seeing the guy sitting at the counter enjoying his breakfast with a sidearm. I look at that like, hey, nobody's going to rob this place today. John, I think I'm going to have to kill the rest of my PowerPoint because we just don't have the time if we're going to take questions. So let's go into a Q&A now. I saw some of you taking pictures of the PowerPoint slides. If you want to leave me your email address, I'll make sure you get the full presentation so you can go through it. And at my next session, I will also recommend to use some resources from, oh my goodness, if your church is insured through either Brotherhood Mutual or Church Mutual, they have lots of resources for safety and security and how you develop teams and policies. This one is from Brotherhood, which insures a lot of churches. I've actually got a copy of a FEMA guide about security in churches. Yay, federal government, doing something good for a change. I think I have that also that I could email you the copy as well. So just indicate when you leave me your email address if you would like a copy of the FEMA manual as well as the PowerPoint slide from today. So, okay, John.
Yeah, and I just want to thank you that are watching by live stream. There's 7 sites that have texted in. I'm sorry?
They can't hear you on live stream. Oh. You got to get up here.
Thank you, people listening by live stream. There's a bunch of you out there, and I thank you for texting in. You can text in a question right now, or you can text one later, and we'll catch it at the next session.
Okay, so while we're waiting for live stream questions to come in, oh, I was going to say, let's take some right here. The question is, what is the average for hiring an off-duty policeman and having his cruiser out front of your church? I'm not sure that I can say to that because different jurisdictions have different pay rates for off-duty police to work to moonlight. I think Redland pays between 75 and 80, maybe, an hour for that gentleman. I can tell you that if you go with an off-duty or let's say a retired officer like the 2 security corporations do that I work for, it would be much less than that, probably in the order of 50 or 60.
Bruce?
Yes?
Faith Glenn Burney has an answer to that, too.
Is this on? Okay. We have Anne Arundel County before, and we have state police now, and we pay $50 an hour for them to be here.
Okay.
So we have state. All you need to do is contact them, and they'll get you someone out here.
Nice. See, and that's the disparity between Anne Arundel County and Montgomery County.
Yeah. How do you deal with a situation like in North Carolina where the perpetrator got into the church and got into the prayer group and then pulled out a weapon and started firing?
And that's a situation that we had, what was it, New Orleans? Where the white...
South Carolina.
Charleston, South Carolina, that's right. That's tough. Boy, that's really tough. Because of those 8 people that are in that prayer group, probably none of them is armed. And if he comes in, like a wolf to the slaughter, once again, unless somebody at that table or in that room can jump on him and try to get that gun away from him, they used to teach us in the police academy, how do you fight when your life depends on it? And I wouldn't say that you should teach everybody in your church to do that, but there are certain parts of the body that you can go after that if you make a good, effective hit, it'll buy you at least a few minutes to do what you need to do. One of the things they taught us was headbutt your suspect. Now, do I like doing that? No, because you get a terrible headache afterwards. But if you can put this on the bridge of his nose here, he's incapacitated for a minute at least, and then you can get the gun away from him. I know. So, I don't know. if, let's say, for instance, you had a senior deacon or something in that prayer group, it might behoove, and maybe somebody that serves on your security team, it might behoove him not to bow his head and close his eyes. Who says you have to close your eyes when you pray? I pray behind the wheel of my car all the time, and if I close my eyes, there'd be a lot of people in peril. That's my only advice, really. Okay?
We got one more question?
Yep.
Just one.
Church liability with your insurance company if you're going to have armed security.
Check with your underwriter. Most churches are insured by either Brotherhood Mutual, Church Mutual, but you find the occasional church that's with State Farm or whatever. Maybe they got an insurance agent in the church that's with the company they're with. Whatever policy you start to put together, always check with your insurance company and say, hey, we're hiring a police officer to come in here. What is our liability? Hey, we're hiring a private security guy. Hey, we got this guy that was in special forces, and he's an expert with, guns, and we're going to try to get him a permit so he can be the guy that will respond in case somebody comes in. And always get feedback, and make sure you have the right insurance riders that will cover you should somebody in your church have to take on a shooter. They'll tell you. In fact, they'll publish whole books to try to cover them in case your person, takes somebody out, and then next thing you know, they're not only suing the pastor and the deacons, and they're also suing Brotherhood Mutual because they know your policy and they let you do it. And
all right, we're going to have to move on to get to the next session, but I've got two things I want to say. And the first one is a text question that came in. We can give a yes, a no, or I'm not sure answer for that. Are Baptist churches considered private property and therefore state CCW not required?
Good question. The Maryland State Police will not look at churches as being private property to the point where, like, if you wanted to carry within your home or on your yard, there is some legality to that. When I was very first police officer in District Heights, Maryland, I remember there was a gas station that the rule at that time, this is 1982, was you can only carry a gun on the premises of a business if you're a manager of the property. And I remember seeing the guys that were helping pump gas, and every single one of them had a gun on their side. And I asked my training officer, what's with all the guns? And he said, oh, they just made everybody a manager. To answer the question, I don't think you can do that in a church in Maryland. Maryland State Police would frown on that.
Okay, thank you. That's a good answer.
Yeah.
Now, I maybe to help you out, because I'm getting a lot of texts here on live stream. They said, I want a copy of that PowerPoint. You'll send it out to as many as want, right?
If you get their email address, we'll make a list, and I'll make sure they get it.
So I've got a question. Would it help you all out, instead of individually having to ask, how about if for everybody that registered, we'll just send you a PowerPoint? Would that help? Okay.
That'll work.
If you have registered, whether you're watching live stream or not, then we will send it to you because we've got your email. If you have not registered, then you'll have to ask and supply an email somehow, okay? Now, we're going to stop on the questions right now, although you can try to grab Bruce on the way if you want to.
Sure.
What we're going to do is we've got 12 minutes, okay? For 12 minutes, you can go out and you can go to the restroom that's there, or you can go past the coffee, take a right, and it's right on the right is a restroom. You can go and get some more orange juice, water, coffee, sugar hit if you want to. You can try to grab Bruce if he's not doing one of the above. And then you can make your way back to where your next session is going to be. The next session for security teams is right here. And if you go past the coffee and take a right and go down the hall, the medical and the internet are down there, and the sign will tell you which room is which. Go all the way to the end of the hall. Thank you very much. And that starts in 11 minutes, right at 10:30, and it'll go to 11:30.
sight. The stars shining down on this holy night. All the angels appear, not too silent, but oh, so bright. While shepherds watch are keeping, everybody else is sleeping. Oh no, they don't know what's right outside their door. No, they don't even know that it's Christmas. Let the bells ring as the choirs of angels sing. Nothing like this has ever happened. Sky explodes and God just
talking to the people that are on the live stream. And that is, some of you realize that if you did not register, then you cannot get that PowerPoint. And so you can text me your email address, and we're going to, okay. And you can text that to me. Thank you so very, very much. We had one question, but we've got a bunch of texts, and we've got a lot of evidence that people like us to offer the live stream option. If that's something that is useful and you want to encourage, let us know. If you're out there on live stream and you've not texted me yet, would you please do that? Here's a number I'm going to give you in a second. Just tell me Aberdeen, Havre de Grace, Ocean City, Westernport. Just put where you are. If you've got a lot, like one of our sites has 7 people watching, let me know that, because I want to share that. That's good news. A bunch of them just have one person. I've not asked. Tell me if you have pajamas on or not. That doesn't matter. And I'm not going to keep your phone number. It's going to disappear after today's gone. But if you've not done so, please text me. And the number is 443-693-3425. One of you got creative and tried the chat, and you're going to get my number that way. But that number again is 443-693-3425. Now, we got one question, and we got several requests for PowerPoint, but we also got one compliment. They said, Bruce, this guy is good and thorough. All right, so this is the second session, and we're going to be working till 11:30. If he gets done a little bit before that, you get question and answer, okay? Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you. Let's see here. Is there a way to get this thing down a little? Arm on the side. Other side. I don't know, do I have to sit on it to do that? Yeah, if this guy's so good. Whoa, my goodness. If I get injured, get Charlie up here. Yeah, if I'm so good, why did the last 14 of my PowerPoint slides all get thrown in the trash? So, all right, it's great to be with you guys today. I do love helping churches that are trying to get this, going or get it right. I believe that when it comes to church security, if you don't relook at your policies and procedures at least once a year and try to tweak them and do some revisions, you're probably harming yourself. So this thing's just going to not be very cooperative. Okay. So, if you're here with a group from your church, have your group raise their hands. Couple of individuals, otherwise got like whole groups and teams here. That's good. That's good. So let's talk about forming teams. I can tell you from my experience when I was an executive pastor in Bowie, Maryland, how we did it. It's not the end-all and be-all, and like I said, it's not a cookie-cutter thing where you could take exactly what we did and plug it into your church, because that's probably not going to work. But we did have retired and off-duty officers that served on that team. We knew who was armed, who wasn't armed. We expanded when they started taking parts off of cars in the parking lot to include security patrols in the parking lots during the services. When there was a custody dispute between exes and the child involved in the dispute was in our extended session, which is basically children's church, we modified and added personnel on doors in the wing where children, did their children's church. So that's what I mean by, every new year brings a new set of challenges or potential incidents where you have to be ready to modify and expand and recover from doing it the way you always did it before, okay? Let me just give you a little bit of insight and recommendations as you put your team together or modify your team, because it's all about safety. Everything we're talking about here is safety and making sure, as best as you can plan ahead, that the people that come to worship, to pray, to study God's word, to hear the word from the pulpit are protected from harm, okay? You can't always prevent in advance the old lady that might slip on the ice in winter on the sidewalk out front, although if your building and grounds committee is doing what they're supposed to, that shouldn't happen either, right? But what we're talking about in planning protocols and policies and putting teams together has everything to do with creating a safer church. So one of the things that I challenge you to do as you put your team together is this: assign roles in your team. Assign roles. The gentleman that we put in charge of making sure that armed officers were actually armed on Sunday mornings, the guy that was in charge of the anti-terrorism group at the FBI field office, once he was on board, I said, Jim, you got to be my guy to decide who carries firearms, who doesn't, and make sure that they are aware of each other and there's no crossfire and we minimize the possibility of an accident. And Jim was happy to do that. Jim had the history for it, and that took something off my plate, even though I could have done it as a law enforcement officer. But having that guy in that point position really did help. Make sure your team, for instance, when we're talking about assigning roles, determines who is ultimately responsible for calling 911 after an incident starts. Once again, we don't want any guesswork about, did somebody call? Who called? You know, I thought Fred called. No, I didn't call. I thought you were going to call. Once authorities are on the scene, who is your designated person to brief the police as they arrive? Now, honestly, if the live shooter's still in the building and shooting, that's going to be the shortest briefing in human history, okay? Because all they want to do is get in there and neutralize the threat. So while you're waiting out front for the cop car to arrive, you need to be thinking about, how do I put this in 3 seconds or 5 seconds? You know? Part of that strategy has to be white male, khaki pants, red shirt, long brown hair. He's in the sanctuary, and he's still shooting, or, you know, whatever the case may be. That's really all that policeman wants to know, other than, okay, where's the sanctuary? Because let's face it, a lot of officers that will respond to your church building have no idea the layout of your buildings. And that's another thing that will benefit you, by the way, if you partner up with your local police department, sheriff's office, whatever. The more of those people that you can get into your building. You know, I've even heard of churches, definitely on Sunday mornings, but even during the week, if your church office makes a pot of coffee for the pastor and the secretary, tell the local police department, hey, you guys come in anytime for free coffee. It's the least we can do for you when you're out there protecting us, you know? Or if a uniform on patrol in your area knows he can get a donut and a free cup of coffee on Sunday morning, you might see him stop by. And of course, if he does, give him or her all the praise you can, you know? Thanks so much for coming by. We love having you guys come through here. Who's going to talk to media? In law enforcement, we call this a PIO. It's a press information officer. And nobody talks to the press except for the PIO, okay? Because you don't want to send mixed messages. Problem is, local news teams want to get the scoop from the person in the pew that was next to the shooter, and they'll do everything they can to try to interview that person. in your policy, you should try to tell people, look, as little as possible, let's keep this in-house. You know, if you feel like you want to be on TV, there's nothing I can do to stop you from it. But let's have this person, you know, this assigned role person be the spokesman for our church. Yes, this was a terrible thing that happened. But we don't need 42 people live streaming and talking on the internet and tweeting people and going on 4 different network stations. Let's keep the message as simple as it can, okay? And then, as you assign roles, assign backups for each role. Because what do you do if Fred is your PIO and Fred's on vacation in Florida this week? There's got to be a backup, okay? So make sure you do at least 2 deep on every role that you assign. The next thing I want to challenge you is this. Identify trained professionals in the membership. We talked about this a little earlier. Police officers, former police officers, retired police officers, former military with weapons experience or combat experience, hand-to-hand, you know. That's the guy I want in the back of the sanctuary, that if someone tries to bust through the door with a weapon, that guy that has the hand-to-hand combat experience, oh yeah, I want him all over that guy, you know. So identify those people and ask them if they will serve in some capacity as you start assigning those roles. I think it's a good idea, even though you could theoretically program your phone so you have a 2-way talk type of thing going on, I think it's a good idea to invest in some portable radios. At Crest Hill, we had a bank charger with 10 portables in it. We also had the earbud microphones that could attach to those portable radios. They would charge all week. Actually, every other week, I would cycle the charge all the way down on those radios and then put them back in the chargers. That's how you keep from replacing batteries every year. Get a radio that will not only do FRS, Family Radio Service, but will also do GMRS. Those are 2 frequency clusters that the FCC says anybody can pick up and use, just like CB radio used to be used. You don't need licenses. You can reset so that you only hear, they call it a private line tone. You only hear the people that are transmitting your private line tone. And then that way, if the CVS up the street is using portables on the same frequency, you either just switch frequency or you set your private line tone different from theirs. You don't want a channel that's crowded in your area, although on Sunday morning, even those that are crowded during the week are usually pretty quiet. But it might take somebody playing with different frequencies and different PL tones to say, okay, this is the magic one for us for Sundays. And have your people come to the Sunday school office or whatever, check out a radio. We actually had them use their own headsets because you don't want somebody else's earwax in your ear, you know. It's a little gross. But I think an investment in 2-way radios for every security team is probably a great idea. When they were stealing catalytic converters from the church parking lot at Crest Hill, if my one guy who was doing the foot patrol, you know, amongst the parked cars happened upon something, I wanted him to be able to call another team member to come out there and assist him right away. Okay? Next, I want to say, as much as possible, create a single entrance into your church. Now, I know that's hard, especially if you have multiple parking lots, people coming in from different sides of the church or whatever. But security works best in an environment where you know where the exits and the entrances are, and you have it stationed. You have somebody there monitoring that all the time. And a backup. Because what do you do if a visitor comes in and says, 10 minutes into the service, oh, I'm sorry we're late. We want our child to go to Sunday school. If you take the person who's at that post and take them down to the Sunday school area, now you've lost your security for a number of minutes. So have 2 people at your one entrance that you have open. And as your crews rove to other parts of the buildings, if there's a door ajar, secure it, okay? Believe it or not, that helps a lot in controlling access to the building. Next, monitor not only what's happening inside the building, not only what's happening at the front door, but what's happening outside the building. If you have security cameras, where's the monitor for that? Where, say, a member of your team can sit in the Sunday school office or whatever office and monitor the cameras, especially for that vital time between a half hour before the morning service and a half hour after. Do you have someone that can sit and watch those cameras? And I mean watch them diligently, and maybe isolate one camera and bring it up to full screen so they can go, what's going on there? I know it costs a little bit of money, but I'll be honest with you. You can go online right now to Tiger Direct or Amazon, and you can get, even now, because ours were wired when I did Crest Hills, you can do a wireless system, and as long as some other transmission doesn't interrupt the wireless signal, you can run 8 cameras for about $400. That's cheap. You know? All you got to do is get 4 people to give $100, and you got your camera system. Draw attention to and be very mindful of all the exits in your church. The church I served at in Bowie, they had an outside entrance door to every single Sunday school room in the building. What a nightmare, right? You had the sanctuary in the center of the building, and all the classrooms are in a U formation around the exterior of the sanctuary with a hallway that separates the sanctuary and all the classrooms. And every single one, and if somebody went out that door, it didn't always close all the way and back into a locked position. So, at that church, the job of security on a routine basis was going around and making sure doors were shut and locked. And believe me, I think we probably had 50 or 60 kids in the children's ministry at that point. Every time a kid goes out that door, it's unsecure and somebody can walk right in. Okay. I challenged you earlier. Think like the bad guy. Okay. And I know that's kind of hard to put yourself in that mindset, but asking the question, what if it happened here, can start the wheels really turning of creativity so that you can go, well, you know, we're a little bit unique in that we've got this exit here or no exits over here, or so if it did happen here in the sanctuary, in the youth center, what would we do? Schedule times where your leadership can sit around and spur discussion with each other. Somebody in that group is going to think of something or an angle that you haven't even thought of yet, okay? And then use that information to get kind of creative about how you're going to address things that could potentially happen within your building and outside your building. Once you establish your relationship with local police, sheriff's office, whatever, ask them if they will furnish for you a list of area crimes in your community. Now, usually this is pretty easy to pull up statistically as far as what crimes are happening where and when. They might try to blow you off and say, hey, you know, on Sunday mornings, we just have like no call. I remember being a policeman in Riverdale, Maryland, and Sunday mornings, boy, if you got a radio call, you were just so bored, you know. There was nothing going on. Until one day, ready for this? There was an incident at a church, and all of a sudden they needed like 3 policemen there. It was a domestic fight within the church, and it was, boy, they were just slamming each other in that sanctuary after the service. So you really never know. But ask law enforcement if they'll give you a detailed list of area crimes, when they are, what they are, how they have occurred in the past, because it will help you to know how to address your church and your situation specifically. Knowledge is power. And learning and then implementing for your security team is half the battle. For the average church that has no plan, that hasn't thought it out in advance, they're sitting ducks, okay? So knowing and then rationalizing through, okay, how should we best do this is half the battle. Inviting local law enforcement to come into your church and walk through and give you recommendations. Developing a relationship with law enforcement. Ask your fire marshal to come and talk about entrances and exits and fire codes, okay? Making sure you talk to your insurance agent who sold you your policy. And if he doesn't know all the ins and outs of your policy, he needs to learn it real quick because you're paying good money for that, okay? Understanding potential risks and then solutions can come from any of those possible sources of information. The police, the fire marshal, the insurance agent, and all of that will help you to develop a much safer church environment. You will have people in your church that will object to all of this, okay? They want to believe that everything is nice and safe at your church already and that you don't really need to do all this. You will also have people in your congregation that are very fearful when you start talking along these lines. Engage them in deeper discussions, okay? Do we have to take half of our budget and our time and attention and put it towards church security? No, we really don't. But we got to do something to make sure that we're all going home after our worship experience. Ask your team, at the end of this road, what does success look like? Map a strategy and say, if we're doing this to the best of our ability to keep all of our members safe, what does it look like? And then recruit and screen and train safety and security team members along those guidelines. The things that you're dreaming up, when we're done, it should look like this, okay? And then everything goes into that effort. And then create a plan that addresses not only live shooter, but any relevant emergency. That can be anything from a flood, to hurricane taking the roof off your church building, your number one deacon having a heart attack, and Charlie's teaching about that in another room, about how having the defibrillators in churches is now almost standard. If you don't have one, you should look into it. They're not that expensive anymore. And then you got to train people in use of it, though. If you don't know how to use it, you shouldn't be touching it probably. So those are some pointers. Now, when it comes to live shooter and your team, what are the options for when the bad guy comes in the door and you know you're in trouble and you're in that room or that sanctuary? What are your options? You heard the old fight or flight, right? We learned that in school, right? Is there another option to fight or flight? What? Hide. And that is something that you're going to need to ingrain not only in your team, but your church members as you train them in advance. You can run, you can hide, or you can fight, okay? Let's talk about those for just a minute. You're going to ask your church members to run away from any potential threat because that's where they'll be the safest, if they get away from the threat, okay? You're going to encourage them to leave all personal items behind, okay? Don't worry about your cell phone or your purse. Get the heck out of there. You're going to assist minors and people with mobility impairments. Don't just everybody run out and leave the guy in the wheelchair there, because that's not very Christian, okay? Jesus would not approve of that. If the children in the setting are in a class situation, you need to keep them together as much as possible. Most churches will check children in and out as they go to the nursery or to a specific class. If your class has to flee the building, you want that roster to be as intact as possible. So make sure you move together as a group if you're managing a bunch of children. The other thing about running, and we'll put it in this classification, is sheltering in place, okay? Because insulating yourself from the attack or the threat is almost as good as leaving the building and going across the street, okay? And if you don't have a protocol in your security planning for how does the fourth grade Sunday school class shelter in place, what are the mechanisms we have to potentially secure that door so the shooter cannot enter and start shooting up kids and the teacher, then you need to look at that. And there's a zillion products on the market that they will sell to you to secure classroom doors and things, but with a little ingenuity, you might just need to make a trip to Lowe's, okay? So that's the run part of your potential reaction. The hide part could also be sheltering in place. When you're unable to quickly or safely evacuate, you should hunker down in place. Secure the door, put furniture up in front of the door, shade the windows. You know, that's all part of the plan that you're going to develop. Conceal your location, basically. Turn off the lights. Remain quiet. And by the way, that means shutting off your cell phone volume, like mine is over there. I already had somebody call me. You didn't even know it. Okay? And while you're sheltered, consider alternative escape routes. Let's say the guy's in the hallway right outside the fourth grade Sunday school class, and they know it because they hear him out there. They hear a pop. They hear him walk by screaming. Doors locked. They're sheltered in place. So what happens if they hear him walk all the way down the hallway, and the next shot they hear is all the way from the sanctuary, but yet they've got a door at the end of that hallway that they could shuffle people out? It's that teacher's call. If she sticks her head out and doesn't see him, she heard the shot really far away in the other part of the building, that may be her opportunity to say, I'm not hiding anymore, I'm running. Let's go, children. And the other thing, you know, that we talked about earlier, and I'm going to reemphasize that we need to increase the percentages on this, is fight. Just because you don't have a gun doesn't mean you can't fight, okay? There are a lot of things you can pick up in a church and use as a weapon. It's funny, years ago when I started working security as a policeman, I only carried a 6-shot revolver, you know, and it was at a time when a lot of automatics were out there with a lot of rounds in a clip, and people said, why are you still carrying that revolver? And I said, well, because 4,000 pounds of automobile is definitely a lethal weapon if I have to use it. Okay? Basically, when it's a life or death situation, anything that you can use, go for it. I don't care if you dent the communion tray. If you can plant it over his head while somebody else is tackling him to try to get the gun off of him, then do it. We can buy another communion tray, okay? Use any means necessary to defend yourself and everyone else in that church. Any means necessary. I'll pick up a nightstand and clock this guy with it if I have to. Work together as a team whenever possible to disarm and subdue the threat, okay? One guy runs and tackles him. If he can't overpower him, then the shooting is going to commence again real soon. So the more men that can just jump, and I don't want to negate women, the more people that can just jump on this guy. And I think back to when I was a policeman and there were people on all kinds of drugs. And, you know, at the time, I've always struggled with my weight. At the time, I think I weighed about 260 pounds. And I laid on a guy's arm who was on PCP, and he was lifting me like I was a feather, just up and down. And I'm thinking, this guy's arm should be pinned to the pavement, okay? The more people you can have that make the jump at the same time, the more chance you're going to have at subduing the attacker and the threat. Incapacitate the shooter. When I say incapacitate, forgive me, Lord, sit on his head if you have to, okay? Whatever it takes to neutralize that threat, you've got to be willing to do it. When you're attacking, yell, scream, okay? Do anything, make noise, and do it all at once, 7 of you. Don't be silent, okay? Because you're looking to overcome a serious aggression that's going to cause people's lives to become in danger. Once you act with physical aggression, see it through. Commit to your actions, okay? All right, I got one more sheet, and then we're going to do some Q&A. Active killer or shooter, we had a definition before on your PowerPoint presentation. Subject comes in, he uses a firearm or possibly has a threat of explosives. He wants to kill as many people as he can in a populated area, okay? We know from case studies that these types of killers are unpredictable. They generally have no predictable pattern as to what they're going to do or about to do. And we also know through the case studies that every single one of them, it evolves quickly. One church shooting where we had a ton of casualties, I think it was 19, police arrived in 14 minutes, and it had already been over for 10. You know? We'll use terms in security planning like cover and concealment. Do you know the difference? You do? Cover means you'll stop a bullet. Concealment will not. That's correct. So concealment is when you crawl under a desk or a pew, you know, you're trying to conceal yourself from the shooter, but in many cases, it's not going to stop the bullet, especially if you're, I mean, I don't know about you, but I couldn't fit under a pew. So if he walks down the space in between the pews, he's going to get me, okay? Cover is a lot different. If that guy shoots around at you, cover is going to either slow down that round or keep it from getting to you. So, in a lot of churches, if you're behind a door jamb and there's a wall, that could be considered cover, depending on what he's firing, whether it's going to make it through the wall to you or not. Now, I don't know about you, but I would much rather have a round fired at me that was slowed down greatly than one that's coming full speed, okay? But there is a difference between cover and concealment. Most of your parishioners in a live shooting situation are going to seek cover. If you're the one guy in your church that has the weapon and you're the point person who's supposed to act, cover's not good enough for you. Cover's not good enough for you. You need concealment because you're the one guy that's going to save all of this, and you don't need to get shot. So, we talked earlier about soft target, how churches are soft targets. Your church security planning process will hopefully make your church less of a soft target. Why do these guys target churches? Well, FBI statistics show that there are a number of reasons. In some cases, churches stand for religious truth, okay? And that many in society find that very narrow-minded or offensive. So they're going after your foundation of your beliefs, okay? Churches are also institutions that are always open to the public. We're always thinking about outreach and evangelism and bringing in the lost, okay? So when the guy shows up and he's a little bit weird with a wig on, yeah, but he's lost. He needs Jesus. So, of course, we're going to open our doors to that person. And anybody can come to our services, right? In fact, we would love for an extra dozen people to come to our services tomorrow, right? Another thing that makes churches kind of the soft target of choice for a lot of these guys, your church service meetings and times are publicly put out there. I can go to a website and find out when your church meets tomorrow, if I don't drive by and look at it on the front sign, okay? So every time you guys are together as a group, I know when you're going to be together as a group. And that makes you a very easy soft target, okay? A number of churches in the U.S. are part of this gun-free zone thing. We have it in Maryland near schools. All schools in Maryland are gun-free zones. And some Christian schools then become gun-free zones by default. So if you have a Christian school in your church is actually in a gun-free zone. Of course, those of us that live in reality know that doesn't mean much. But most churches have no safety or security measures that they've planned in advance. The majority do not. And that's what we're also trying to make sure that doesn't happen at your church. Do you know the difference between lockout and lockdown of a facility like your church? Okay, lockout is when the deadly force threat is outside the building or might be in another part of your building, and you can lock doors, or if he's outside, exterior doors, to keep that threat from entering. By and large, statistics show that that's not what happens. He gains access pretty easily. But if you see him coming from the parking lot with the AR-15, yeah, by all means, lock out and announce it. Have people take cover, okay? Lockdown is when the shooter is in the building or in an interior room, and there's other rooms where people are sheltering in place, okay? Last comments, and then we'll do Q&A. Active shooter situations are absolutely unpredictable, okay? You never know what's going to happen when or how. And they always evolve very, very quickly. You need to be on your toes, folks. Active shooter situations are often over in less than 10 minutes. The average is 4.5 minutes, and it's done. And it's 10 to 15 minutes before law enforcement usually arrives on the scene. Of course, that changes a lot, whether you're suburban, urban, rural. I can venture to say that at my house, and I'm in rural Berkeley County, West Virginia, if I called the sheriff's office, I might see a uniform at my door in about 15 to 20, maybe, depending on how staffing is that day. When I used to work in Prince George's County as a police officer, you called for a backup and cruisers started falling out of the sky in about 2 minutes. That felt really good. How you respond will be dictated by the specific circumstances of the encounter, which are unpredictable, okay? So remember that the congregation and visitors are likely to follow the lead of church leaders. Something happens in the sanctuary, everybody's going to look to the usher, the pastor. What is he doing? What are we going to do? We're going to follow their lead. It's instantaneous. It just happens. So those people have to be prepared to lead that congregation in what's happening. Does that mean that you shout from the back of the room, lockdown? I don't know. You guys have to figure that out. 5 O's for survival. 5 O's for survival. First of all, you figure out what's going on. We got to figure this out. And we got to do it by the seat of our pants, in the flash of a blinking eye. I got to figure it out. The next O is get out. If you can, get out. Okay? The third O is hide out. If you can't escape and get out, you're going to have to hide out in the building. Take cover, take concealment, try to wait it out. Look for something to arm yourself with. If he comes over here by me, he's going to get this mic stand in the face. Okay? The third O is take out. There will be times where you need to take out the guy who's trying to kill your people. Take him out means attacking him, disarming him, sitting on his head until the police arrive. You don't take him out of the building and beat him as much as you would like to, okay? And the last O for survival is help out. It's what Charlie's teaching over there right now, first aid. I just was listening to WBAL radio the other day. There's a huge push in Maryland, and a lot of the hospitals are offering free classes called Stop the Bleed, okay? There was a, boy, where did I put that note? There was a statistic between 2 church shootings where one church shooting that happened, basically the same size church, same size congregation, same shooting as far as how the method was that he attacked, what type of weapons he was using. In one case scenario, 19 parishioners lost their lives. In the other, it was the shooting at the military base in Georgia. Same type of shooter, same type of weapons, amount of ammunition, but because it was a military installation, there were military officers who had trained in triage and being the medic on the battlefield, and they got to stop the bleeding of so many people who had been shot that they only had 7 deaths. I thought that was very, very revealing. So as you do your medical training with Charlie and others, one of the classes that I think would be absolutely paramount for at least your leaders on your security team is, how do you stop the bleeding? Is there a tourniquet in a first aid kit in your church? When I was a policeman, we didn't carry tourniquets. I know officers right now that carry them right on their gun belts, because if somebody gets shot in an arm or a leg and you can't apply a tourniquet, he's going to bleed out and he's going to die. So those are the type of things that you need to be thinking about in that portion of your security preparation plans. Okay. Questions, comments?
What are your thoughts about signs out front where they say armed personnel on premises?
I think it sends the wrong message. Okay. Now, this is just me. Your church doesn't have to decide to do it this way. My thinking is, if you have armed personnel in the church, that needs to be a secret to most people. Having your church members know that someone has been designated and is armed here, and let's, you know how the grapevine works. Everybody's going to know who it is, you know. But it's almost like the church in my area in Hagerstown that put a little sign in the yard that said, your dog, or thou dog shouldst not poop here. Because they had so much dog excrement on their front lawn of their church, and they were always cleaning it up. The people with the dogs never did. So they put that out there, and I'm thinking, okay, well, you just killed like any possibility of somebody coming to visit your church because you're being snotty about the dog poop. Same thing, only worse with firearms. I wouldn't be super secretive that people are carrying weapons, but I wouldn't put a big sign up. Nope, I would not.
Question from the live stream. Thank you. And by the way, we double teamed that church, and with two of us telling them that, they took the sign down. They did.
They did.
Yeah, they took it down.
They did when they sold the building.
Here's one. They did before that. Before that.
Yeah, they did.
So a question from live stream. Should the doors in the lobby that go into the sanctuary be kept closed or left open?
From a security standpoint, most doors that lead from the lobby to the sanctuary are not lockable. Is that your experience? So I don't think it really matters whether they should be left open or closed, security-wise. Most churches, once the service starts, the sanctuary doors are closed, so that if there is talking out in the foyer, it doesn't filter into the sanctuary. But for doors that normally will not lock anyway, I don't think there's any advantage to that security-wise or not.
Okay. Second question from live stream, and then you guys are going to be back in, because I got to get these things off my text here. How should you control verbal communications during a situation as not to cause confusion? Thanks. So how should you control verbal communications during a situation as not to cause confusion?
Okay. So once again, this goes back to your strategy plan. If there is an incident, how do you communicate? We know how the team communicates with each other. They're either using walkie-talkies or, whatever. But how do you communicate to the congregation without things being confusing? Well, in a case like the shooting in Texas that we saw the video on, okay, there was no time to communicate anything to the congregation. Now, let's say in that scenario, the guy shows up in the foyer or at the front door before he gets in the foyer, and it's revealed that he has a gun. At that point, if those sanctuary doors would lock, I would lock them in a heartbeat, because you're trying to contain the innocent people away from the threat, okay? But then how do you communicate to the church that you are now on lockdown? Well, you got to develop that plan in advance. The pastor's preaching. The minister of music is leading the hymn. How do you let them know that the security team is about to put the church on lockdown? You got to have a method. You got to either have the security person that's in the back of the sanctuary do this or whatever the sign is, or just interrupt the pastor and say, Pastor, I'm really sorry I have to do this, but we are officially on lockdown. Everybody take cover. That's all the stuff you work out in advance, so that when you do have to communicate a message to your congregation in the middle of an event or a service, there's no confusion. And your point people that you've selected to be leaders are the ones that can call that shot. The average church member cannot. The guy that wants to be on the security team but was turned down for obvious reasons cannot. I'm just being honest here, okay? But there are just a few people that can call that shot if there's a threat, okay? I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. I'm looking, I see a hand back here. We're using the microphone because that way not only you heard, but the live stream people hear.
There you go.
Just like designing a defensive backfield, if you've got, let's say, 2 security people inside the congregation, is there an optimal seating thing? And say you have a door there, a door at the back, how would you position those people when they're unarmed, as we are today, or maybe in the future even armed?
Your positioning within the sanctuary or the building itself should be at a point of greatest visible advantage. That may mean if you have a balcony in the back of the church that one of those guys is on the balcony, although the downside to that is it might take him a while to get from the balcony downstairs. But it definitely gives you your crow's nest view of everything that's happening in that sanctuary, except for what's right under the balcony. Ideally, if there's only two of you and the sanctuary, say, seats 200, I would flank in the back on one on each side. Gives you the greatest viewpoint and the quickest ability to get to a problem. Okay?
Should you wear a security shirt? If I'm thinking like a criminal,
Okay.
I'm taking out security first.
That's correct. The advantage to having the security identification on your clothing or around your neck on a, ID thing, is that it helps your people feel safe and security's here and they're doing their duty and I feel okay. The disadvantage is those are the first people that are going to get taken out if a guy comes in with a weapon. What's the solution to that? I'm not really sure. Would you rather your people feel safe or be safe? And in most churches, when the membership is probably less than 100, everybody already knows who the security people are anyway. You don't need to don anything for that to be identified. Frankly, one of the reasons I like driving around in an unmarked car as a police officer and being in plain clothes was because you could get the drop on somebody pretty quick if they didn't know who you were and what you were doing.
4 minutes left here for questions. Text them in 443-693-3425.
Which, by the way, is what happened in the church in Texas. He was in plain clothes. Even though he was the security guy of the day, he was in plain clothes and he got the drop on the guy.
Now, the guy in Texas, he come in a trench coat, hat, wig, beard. He walked through the doors. How come that man wasn't addressed right there? And
okay, so let me ask you a question. Everybody that comes into your church just because they look a little goofy, you're going to stop them and say you can't go in the sanctuary?
If they're wearing a wig and a fake beard and a backpack, is it okay to have rules about backpacks?
If I'm not mistaken, in the South Carolina shooting, Dylan Roof had a backpack. He looked a little bit disheveled, and they invited him into the Bible study, and he blasted them all. So, and this is what I talked about when I said, the nature of a church is that we want to bring people in, we want to get them introduced to Christ, start on their own spiritual journey, and hopefully eventually step across the line of faith and be saved. But just because the guy comes in with a backpack and looking a little goofy, all the security team's eyes were on him. All the deacons and the ushers' eyes were on him. But you're not going to prevent him from coming into the church unless he's creating a disturbance on his way in. And he wasn't doing that. So you can develop a policy at your church that if anybody comes in looking weird like that, we're going to stop them and talk to them first. But I'm not sure that's going to be the greatest for outreach and evangelism and what we're ultimately trying to accomplish in our churches. Just a comment. Your church could set it up totally different. The guy comes in looking wacko, we're going to hold him at the gate. Yeah.
Is it fair to say that most of the perpetrators are not really sophisticated in that they've had law enforcement or military training, that most of this is more on a whim, so that if we have a minimum of training, we still may have an advantage?
Some of the FBI statistics indicate some former military training, but not, I think it was like 22%. So it's not, a lot of these guys are fly-by-night, or they're doing their own, or they're going to the range themselves because they're enamored with weapons, the more trained, the more trained you are, the better off in evening out the odds in your favor. But there was some military, no former law enforcement that I know of that has ever been a live shooter in a situation like that.
Yeah, this is a comment, not a question. We're from North Hartford Baptist. We did reach out to the Hartford County Sheriffs. They sent 2 sheriffs over. They walked through everything you've talked about today was what they told us, you know, one-on-one with us, layout of the building, etc. So what you've brought today is great. Future, they're going to come to our church, and they're going to meet with the entire congregation or those who will want to stay and help us with a plan and how this all should play out. So
Hartford County Sheriff's Office is one of the most church-friendly sheriff's departments in the state. I love those guys.
yes, they will, and they will set you up with an officer.
We got maybe one more question here, I think.
Good.
That's it.
As far as training for the congregation as opposed to the leadership, I mean, in training, people are going to hide or try to hide because they don't have the training, and you know, like if you're part of military. So how much would you put training for the congregation as opposed to the leadership? I mean,
Leadership is obviously much higher as far as the level of training and expectation. But I would make sure that I at least printed a little paper or a booklet to let the congregation know what the policy is if you have to implement certain things.
Well, would you do it like at a service, do like if there's a video I would call Run, Hide, Fight, would you do that in a service?
I don't know that I would do it in a worship service, but if you wanted to have a training event where all the church was invited to participate in something like that, you know, those that want to will, those that don't won't, and you just try to get as many people as you can in something like that. But definitely your leaders and your security team should go through that kind of video training. Definitely.
Well, we're going to stop right now. We're going to make a break. And I think Bruce is willing. You can come right up front and ask him any questions before you don't have to run out the door, do you?
I can still answer questions for
so
a while.
We can do that, but we'll allow all the people that need to go. I would ask you 2 things. Number one, if you've got anything you want to give on how we can improve this, or just say, like one person said, phenomenal. Another person said, you know, great and thorough. If you want to put anything like that on there, then that'll help us to know, you know, what's what. You can just stick it on the table on the way out, and I will use that in planning things in the future. And secondly, if you drink coffee, would you grab one of those boxes of Joe and take it home with you? Particularly, there's more of you that do the original than the decaf. Take the thing and give it away to your friends or something, because I don't drink coffee. And my wife would really be blessed if you go and take some more of those things home with you, the little goodies she made. And if you want to, just grab one of the empty containers and take 3 or 4, or take the whole thing with you. If you like the munchkins, or you got 6 kids at home, just grab the box and take it with you. Okay, don't take like the microwave. That belongs at the church. But, you know, any of those other things, take them, please, because I'm not going to be able to use all that. Let's close in prayer, and then you're free to...
Let me just say that I am always available to help churches with church security matters. If you need assistance from me, my email is xcopbruce@aol.com. That's right, xcopbruce@aol.com. Or you can get me at bruce@blueridgebaptist.org, all run together. And happy to help you with any need you have.
Or if you go to the Baptist Convention in Maryland, Delaware, and look at the team, my picture's on there, if you remember me, John, and just say, what's that cop's name again? And I'll give you...
That's right.
We meet together once a month, so I'll forward you to him also, okay? Anything else you wanted to say before I lock the door?
Don't forget that books are available through your insurance company for church security planning. Brotherhood Mutual has one that's a little expensive, but hey, if that's who your insurance carrier is, I'd recommend getting their book and reading through it.
There you go. All right, let's close in prayer, and then we allow you that option to stick around and ask a question. If everybody's talking, you might have to come up front, but let's just close. Gracious Father, we do thank you for the expertise that you've brought to us today in the presenters, and we ask your blessings on us as we seek to use that as part of the ministry to bring people to know Jesus and to help them to be safe when they find him. And we pray
then journey mercies for these that are here, and blessings on those that watched elsewhere. We pray in the name of Christ. Amen. So we are officially dismissed, and the live stream will stop.